Hi everyone and welcome back. So this is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, let's just go and watch that first. But this one I'm just going to cover about surgery and kind of the chemo and what the surgery entailed. So I'll just go straight in with the chemo that George had. So he had 6 rounds in total of chemotherapy. He had 3 on a 3-week basis, so he had 3 rounds for 3 weeks. And how it worked was he started it at the beginning of December, which obviously was a bit of a rubbish start to Christmas, and he had that for 3 weeks, and then he had one in between Christmas and New Year, another 3 weeks, and then he had the 3rd one. So I can't remember exactly what chemo he had, but I believe George does say in his video, so I'll link that down below and you can go and watch that as well. But it was quite a harsh drugs mixed together, and luckily, as I did say in my last video, he didn't really get many side effects. He just had nauseousness and he lost his hair. So he had those rounds 3 times. He then stopped the chemo in the middle of January, which then prepped him ready for his surgery. So the surgery that he was having was a full stomach removal, and the scientific name for it was total extended radical gastrectomy with a D2 dissection. Now I'm not entirely sure what the D2 dissection is. I'm not sure if it's where maybe they cut it or just kind of more of a doctor term. So this was the surgery that he was told he was having, and this was a bit of a shock because up until now we'd thought that he was just going to have the tumour removed and that would be it, and not his full stomach removed. So when we found this out, it was quite shocking. Obviously there were lots and lots of questions. It was definitely harder for me as I never went to any of the appointments because I was always at work and they were always during the day. So it was difficult, obviously, from my perspective, knowing what exactly he was going to go through because I was just getting the relay of what was being told. But obviously his family did a really good job and he did a really good job of informing me and everything that I needed to know. So that was a bit of a shock, knowing that he was having his full stomach removed, and he was told to eat a lot of food so he could put as much weight on as possible because come the surgery he would then lose quite a bit. So he took that in his stride and he absolutely filled his boots. He would eat whenever and whatever he wanted, like all the time coming up to his surgery. So when his surgery came, he was getting all prepped for it. He had to have an iron transfusion about a week before just to make sure he had enough iron in his blood ready for the surgery. And then his surgery day was on the 6th of March 2019, and I think up until then, knowing that he had cancer obviously was a hard thing to come to terms with, but he was taking it really well, and it was up until surgery that he'd done really well in kind of understanding it. And it was on the surgery day that I think it finally hit him. So I had a half day. I went to work that morning and then ended up going up to the hospital that afternoon, so I wasn't there for it, but we both woke up about 4-5 a.m. and my anxiety was really bad. Even though I know it wasn't me that was going through the surgery, I was just really worried for what the outcome was going to be. So I was a nervous wreck to put it blankly. So I said goodbye to George about 5 a.m. in the morning, and he went up to the hospital with all of his family, and this was a hospital that was probably about 45 minutes away from us. So it wasn't like the hospital he'd been going to for all of his chemo, it was just a bigger hospital. He was in the room with his dad just before the surgery, and the doctor came in to see how he was, and apparently he just got really upset and just started crying. And I think he'd finally come to terms with kind of what was going to happen and what was happening. Like, they were removing his pride and joy. He lived to eat, he loved it, it was his favourite thing to do, and they were taking that away from him. And obviously that was something that was really hard to come to terms with. You can't imagine, I think, what it will feel like until you are there experiencing that. So his surgery was 8 hours long, I believe. It was either 6 or 8 hours long, and he was under for that amount of time. And I'll put a picture up of what they kind of did for the surgery, because they basically, under his esophagus, they cut out a small part of his esophagus, his whole stomach, and part of his intestine. So they removed all of that, and they said that basically if they didn't remove his stomach, the stomach cancer would have kept coming back. So that's why they decided to remove all of his stomach, and they basically removed it and then took the intestine and took the esophagus and joined them together. So it went all the way down rather than kind of, obviously we go down, stomach and then intestine. I'll insert a picture because I'm not a doctor and that was really not the best way of explaining it, but I'll insert a picture of how they do it, and I will also insert a scan picture that George posted on his Instagram of what it looks like after to not have a stomach. So yeah, that's what they did. It was 8 hours long, and I finally saw him about 7 p.m. that evening, so I hadn't seen him for over 12 hours. And he seemed okay when I saw him. We went in and we all took it in turns seeing him in the ICU, and he seemed okay. He was kind of awake, talking. I think it was also the anaesthetic that was obviously helping with how he was feeling. I saw him for a little bit and then we went home, and I saw him, went back every day. So he was in hospital for 10 days in total. It was meant to be about a week, but they kept him in, and I think it was mainly because they were struggling to keep his pain management under control. So he originally had a epidural, which is like a needle into your back, I believe, which numbs you kind of from the waist down, but that failed, so he didn't get that as pain relief. And on the first day that I went to see him, after, like the next day after his surgery, his pain was unbearable to him. He was just crying the whole time, and obviously that is awful to have to watch and to have to see, and there is literally nothing that you can do about it. And yeah, that was just a horrible thing to see. Obviously he had tubes come out of him, and he obviously had all the dressing from where they'd done the surgery. So he was in quite a lot of pain for quite a few days, just whilst they were trying to figure out the best pain relief to give him. And they eventually, about 3 or 4 days later, moved it over to morphine, because before he was on like a drip method where he had to press a button for it. Whereas they now did this so that it was a constant drip, which definitely worked better. And they then got him up into a chair, and he was sitting in a chair rather than laying in the bed, and that was about day 7 that he did that. And then they moved him onto another ward, which was out of the ICU. Didn't have any cannulas in him with the pain medicine being like dripped into him. It was all tablet based, so he was taking the tablets now instead. And they let him go home after about 10 days, and I think he really struggled with this because this was obviously coming to terms with a new way of life, and he was quite down for the first couple of weeks after the surgery because everything he'd ever known and ever enjoyed and ever liked had been taken away from him. And as someone from the outside watching that is a very hard thing to see, because you can't do anything, you can't help them, all you can do is support them and watch. So that was something that was quite difficult to watch, and I think all of this family can say that, because he'd been so upbeat up until before the surgery, and then he'd just taken a complete turn and he just wasn't as positive anymore, and he just didn't really see, I don't think he really saw what the point was. He was like, but the only thing I love has been taken away from me, and how am I meant to be happy now? And I remember him saying that to me, and it's hard because yes, everything he loved had been taken away from him, but had it not been, he wouldn't have survived for as long as he did, because the tumour that he had was taking up like most of his stomach. So it had to be done, but it was hard trying to watch him understand why it was happening. So it was then about a month after the surgery that he started his chemo again. They just wanted him to make sure that he was strong enough again. He was eating, which he was finding quite difficult because he couldn't eat big portions, he couldn't eat anything sugary, he couldn't eat a lot of carbs. He was being like filled up. It was hard trying to know, I think, what he could and couldn't eat, and that was something that even like a year later he was still struggling on finding things that worked for him and things that didn't work for him. So he was being encouraged to eat. He had these little like energy drink type things that he was given just to make sure he was getting the calories that he needed throughout the days after surgery. So they waited about a month until they started chemo again, and they did it, I think they did exactly the same chemo that he had previously, except every time that he was losing weight they had to kind of put it down slightly because it went based on your weight and how much your body could take. So he had another 3 rounds of that, again 3 weeks apart, and he finished that about the middle of June, I believe. And I have actually got a video on my Instagram of him ringing the treatment bell, and I'll link my Instagram down below so you can go and give that a watch. But yeah, he got to ring the end of treatment bell, and that was a really emotional thing to watch as well, and that was emotional for him because he'd been through all of this and he was finally getting to ring the bell to say that he was done. And all of the nurses were there, they all watched, and it was just a lovely thing to be able to do, watching him sitting in a hospital bed having like chemicals literally pumped into him. That was not something that is obviously nice to see, and being able to ring the bell. So yeah, he got to ring the end of treatment bell, which was a lovely thing to do. So if you want to watch that, I will link that down below. So that was the end of his treatment as far as we thought. So it was about a month after his last chemo session, he had a CT scan, and it was just to see kind of what the CT scan was showing, how the cancer was looking, if there was any. Unfortunately, they found cancer behind his belly button and in his lymph nodes, which he did previously have in his lymph nodes, and the surgeon did remove quite a few of them in the surgery, but he might have obviously missed some, he might not have taken them all out. So I think that was kind of expected. They did say from the start that the cancer was just too big for him to have surgery, have 6 chemo sessions, and for it to be completely gone out of his body. And that was something that was hard to understand and grasp, especially when you don't realise the full extent of it. So we found that out, and then about a week or 2 weeks later we found out that unfortunately there was nothing they could do about the cancer that he had. So they said, "You are classed as incurable," is the word that they gave him, and they basically just said, "We're going to put you on chemo just to prolong your life," is what they said. And hearing that is not something that you'd think you'd ever hear, and coming to terms with that was extremely difficult. So they said that the chemo that he was being put on had a 5% chance of killing the cancer completely. And at this point they also mentioned something called immunotherapy, which can change the way your cells react, I believe, and it'll basically make your cells kill off the cancer cells, but he had to have a correct blood match for that to work. So a couple of days after this, George was back in his positive mindset and his positive self, and he decided that he was not going to let the cancer beat him. This was not what he was going to do. So he took on, and he called it Operation Kill Cancer. So he decided to become vegan and do everything plant-based, as there was some research saying that this had actually helped cure and get rid of cancer. So he decided to try that, and he said he's not calling it incurable, he's calling it curable, and he's going to do his very best to try and get rid of it. So he stuck doing this, and being vegan and not having a stomach is something that is incredibly hard, because it's trying to find enough protein in the foods that you can eat and maintain a certain weight. So he did struggle with that quite a bit, and then he did this for a couple of months or so, and at the end of September he had another PET scan, and the tumour that was behind his belly button and in his lymph nodes had disappeared. So he was told that he was cancer free, and being told that after you've been told that you are incurable is amazing. He proved all of the medical people wrong. So they told him that he had no active cancer left in his body, and this was news that we were not expecting. This was amazing, and there was a mix of things that he was doing with being vegan, and obviously he was on chemo as well, so it could have been a mix of all of those or one particular thing, but obviously that's something that we don't know what that is. So he then decided that now that he'd been told that he had no active cancer left in his body, he started bringing certain meats back into his diet just because he was really struggling with his weight at the time. So he started bringing kind of chicken back in, and he wouldn't eat any red meat, and he wouldn't eat pork or bacon, so anything pig. So he was just eating chicken, and he was drinking cow's milk, and that was it. So he wasn't fully back to eating like all meats, just chicken, and that did help with him keeping his weight at a steady level. I think the thing that shocked him the most was he was so shocked by being told that he had no active cancer left in his body, and all of his doctors were shocked and over the moon that this had happened, especially as they told him that he was incurable, that like that isn't something that you don't expect to happen. So they carried on the chemo, and they didn't want to pull him off of it just yet. They wanted to kind of see how it was going and what was happening, and he was still on it. So at this point he stayed on chemo for about 3 months after he had no active cancer left, and he had now been on chemo for a year on and off, and obviously that takes your toll on your body. You are literally putting chemicals inside your body, and that was difficult to watch, and that was difficult for him as well, because it doesn't just affect obviously trying to kill the cancer, it affects your body as well. It can affect your brain, it affects your mental health, it affects the way that you may look or the way you also feel. And there are a lot of side effects, and not just the physical appearance ones, with obviously losing hair. And that was something that he did have trouble coming to terms with, but he always dealt with it very, very well. So I'm going to leave the video there, just because I feel like I've covered kind of everything that needed to be covered with terms of chemo and surgery, and I hope this has helped some people in understanding, or if anyone is going through the same thing or their family members are going through something similar, that being positive definitely helps as well. And that is something that George always told people, and I think he proved himself. He was so positive throughout his whole journey that even his doctors said like he should not have made it as far as he did. If you're watching this and you are going through this, or someone that you know or one of your family members is, it will get better. And I know right now it might not seem like it, but it will. So my next video I'll go on to talk about George going on to immunotherapy, and him also sadly passing away, which has almost been 5 months now since we lost George, which has been a very hard and emotional roller coaster journey, and it's not something that I would wish upon anyone, losing someone this young, but I try and take every positive that I can out of everything, and he has taught me more in life in the past 5 months than I think I've ever learned in my whole life. And I am so thankful that I wake up every morning happy, healthy and alive, because not everyone gets that opportunity, and people that have died had plans for the day after. Like people that died yesterday had plans for today, and life is precious and life is so short that you should never take it for granted, and you should have so many goals in your life that you want to accomplish, because you never know when your last day is going to be. And that is something that I think about every single day, because George can't be here to continue his journey and spread the messages, the positive messages that he did, and help so many people. So I feel like it's only right if I continue what he wanted to do and what he was doing, because he was such an amazing person. So if I could give one piece of advice to anyone, it is, you have one life, don't waste it, and achieve every goal and dream that you have set out for yourself, because you should take life into the palm of your hand and just do whatever you want to do with it. And that is something that George would have always preached to people and tell people, because he was so close to not making it throughout his whole cancer journey, and he was so thankful to also wake up every day, and he used to stay awake past midnight just to make sure that if he didn't wake up the next morning, he made it another day, like another day. And for us to be healthy and alive each day that we wake up, we should be so thankful for that, because not everyone gets that opportunity and not everyone gets that chance. So thank you very much for watching. I hope this was as interesting as the last one. I feel like I probably rambled a bit, but thank you all for watching. Please make sure to like, comment any questions that you might have, and subscribe. And I'll link my Instagram and George's Instagram down below, and I'll also link George's channel if you wanted to watch his version of events on the surgery. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!